What's going on, everyone? We are back with another one. We almost did not have the world's best, probably most popular design tool. We almost had the world's best meme generator. I don't know if that has the same ring to it.
Or drone fleet analytics.
That's true. Imagine giving up billions and billions, not knowing it, for that. Today, we are talking about Figma in 5 acts. If you listen to one of our previous episodes on windsurf, we did windsurf in 3. Today we have Figma in 5. And through our research and collaboration, to be honest, I really like a lot of where this episode is. I think from a technological standpoint, there's going to be a lot that we end up learning from this one. But one more thing that I think a lot of people aren't going to think about is how you don't have to be right at every stage in order to do something pretty phenomenal. And there were some really, really big wins here. But before we get into that, let's get into our introductions. If you haven't been here before and it's your first time, thanks for hanging out. But just in case, I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Danny Thompson. I am the Director of Technology at This.Labs and the community organizer for the Commit Your Code conference happening in Dallas, Texas. Get your tickets.
Coming up very soon. And I'm Noel, one of your other co-hosts and Managing Director of Engineering for a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders and community member at 100 Devs. Now, we're talking about Figma, obviously because of the IPO that just took place. At the time of recording, $58 billion market valuation that, as you alluded to in the beginning, almost was a meme generator. You're good.
I cut that line and stuff. So just go from like,
redo that the was line of meme almost generator. A meme generator instead of a $58 billion company. And so we want to go through the whole wild story. There's a lot of twists and turns, but there's also a lot of like real technical feats that like I don't think most people actually know what was happening underneath the hood. It's a really good story about like the progression of the web and what we're able to do today, and a lot of stuff that we honestly probably just take for granted because we don't know that it's happening underneath the hood. And so I think it's a really cool mix of the journey that a founder goes through. It's a good mix of the technical challenges that they overcame and then resulted in a tool that a lot of us love.
I think we need to start at what it was that happened in the beginning. And so this kind of leads us into Act 1, which was, I'm calling the idea maze, right? The beginning and the vision, that kind of area. And so for those that don't know, Dylan Field was the creator of Figma originally, but he kind of stood at a crossroads in 2011, and I relate a lot with that. There was a point in my life where I was at a crossroads where I didn't know where I was going, and one thing in particular was that he was faced with like a lot of choices and ideas, and he didn't really know where to take it. And he saw like there was a lot of technologies that were coming out, and he was initially like really drawn to drones, which I think a lot of people, they're cool, but he also saw like a lot of potential. He's like, if we can do this in the right way, there's a lot of upward growth trajectory. And he quickly realized, as he was kind of building this and getting excited about it and really even advocating for it and telling people about it, there were a massive amount of regulatory hurdles that he was going to have to try and navigate. But one extra thing was that he didn't initially anticipate hardware complexities that would potentially limit the impact of a drone analytic business. This was not something he was expecting.
Yeah. And I think to kind of set the tone a little bit too, he's doing a CS math undergrad at Brown. It's 2012. This is kind of before the startups really became cool. It wasn't a thing that everyone was doing. Of course, we had Zuck that came through Harvard and kind of did the Facebook journey. I dropped out of Yale in 2010. I was still a little early before the Thiel Fellowship was like, it was around, but like nobody really knew about it yet. And so Dylan is at this crossroads, right? Where he's learning, he's building, and he has this business want and ultimately wants to drop out to work on one of these ideas. And I think one of the interesting thing back then was that he's telling his parents that he has these ideas, drones one week, something else another, and then he's going to drop out. Parents are freaking out. Like, we put all of our life savings into getting you into one of the best universities in the world, and you want to leave to pursue something else. Now, to me, that's a wild journey to start out on, and is lucky that he meets Evan Wallace while he's there.
Stage entrance Evan Wallace.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things about Evan Wallace is that was doing some really interesting stuff for at the time with WebGL that other folks might not have even been tinkering with, playing with. And it was this kind of combination of the business want and the technical ability coming together that led them to start making some pretty cool things.
It's funny because he even said in an interview that this was a very pivotal moment for a couple things. Number one, it leads Dylan and Evan to their next idea that they start working on. And they actually do build something that people are using, and he's loving it. And that was the meme generator. And they learned a ton of technical aspects, not just about tech as a whole, but tech as a business. They end up learning a lot. And interestingly enough, at one point, they basically created the internet's best meme generator. And Dylan says, we created the best internet meme generator. We created the best internet meme generator. And with that, he realized all the hard work was almost meaningless to a certain degree because it's a meme generator.
Yeah, he was originally like really excited, like memes are the future, right? Like it seems like memes are the future. We got to be in front of the memes. And then you start to step back. You have someone with a lot of aptitude at one of the best universities in the world that's convinced somebody else at one of the best universities in the world to
pursue.
And whenever we were doing research on this, a lot of people label this like the darkest week in Figma, where they have like this come to life moment where they're like, wait a minute, we're not going to go take those fancy Silicon Valley jobs to work on memes. And there's like a crisis that happens and they have to figure out what's next.
Yeah, but the project wasn't a bust.
Nope.
I mean, he said one thing in an interview that I loved. He said, we created the internet's best meme generator, but we quickly realized we wanted our work to have greater meaning than memes. Mm-hmm. We need to pivot. And that's one thing that I've often said. Sometimes the thing that you're doing isn't necessarily always going to be the right thing, but it may be the information you need that leads you to the right thing. And so it's hard to know what each step is in total accuracy, but at least if you have a plan and you take a step and you learn something new, you can pivot to where you need to be. So this is the entire embodiment of my life's mantra: fail, pivot, grow.
Yep.
He kind of got to where he needed to be, realized, hey, even though it's winning, it's kind of a failure because this isn't what we need to be doing, and this isn't where we're going to find our life's mission. We now need to take the information that we have, pivot to where we need to be, and grow in that new environment. And they grew, and they were able to salvage one thing in its entirety that really helped them kind of skyrocket to another level. And that was that project birthed an advanced text rendering technique by Evan Wallace, which became a crucial development that they would soon leverage for significant other areas, which we're going to get into in a minute.
Yeah.
But at this, unless you have something you want to add, there's another thing.
I was just going to say, this is kind of the point where it goes back to that original project that Evan had with the WebGL, right? And we're at a point now at this timeline, it's like 2012, and then this kind of spans all the way up to like 2015 even, where drawing on the web was predominantly CPU based, right? And you were rendering divs and then maybe canvas, but how we produce stuff in the browser was very different. WebGL's on the scene, and now you can draw stuff with the GPU, and it's going to change how we can actually render what you see in the browser. And this is phenomenal for a meme engine, even more phenomenal for a design tool that's going to exist in the browser and not rely heavily on a desktop app that you have to install, that has all that friction, that has to update. It was a big paradigm shift, right? This idea of being able to do stuff in the browser that was that heavy. Up until that point, the design tools were interesting. You had a few things, right? You had like, of course, Photoshop, super heavy, have to install. I don't know what you were using back then, but my first design tool was Balsamic, and then all the rage was Sketch, right? And Sketch was a wonderful tool, still not native to the browser, and eventually doesn't have the real-time stuff that Figma eventually develops. But this idea of, wait a minute, we can do this stuff in the browser and all the benefits that could come from it, and then all the technical challenges they had to dive into to make that happen, is a 3-year period.
It's funny because by near the end of 2012 is when they start deciding to create Figma.
Yeah.
And start going through this. Now, you asked me what design tools I was using then. It was MS Paint and paper and pen, because I had no clue what a design tool was in 2012. We'll get back to the show in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors. Financial literacy is important, especially if you are in a position where you are changing careers and income brackets. More income can create larger financial issues if you don't budget correctly. So this episode is sponsored by Lucas Casares, certified financial planner and founder of Level Up Financial Planning, where he specializes in serving early and mid-career tech professionals to help you take your financial confidence to the next level.
Danny and I have helped thousands of people level up in tech, often going from 0 to 6-figure careers, and we've seen all kinds of mistakes. Level Up Financial Planning helps you gain clarity on all of your finances. This includes prioritizing manager-employer stock, retirement planning, tax planning and preparation, college planning, and as a special deal for our listeners, you get a complimentary meeting with Lucas. So please visit levelupfinancialplanning.com to find out more.
He's been a great supporter of the show, and to be honest, a lot of people have already checked him out.
Yeah.
I highly recommend checking him out. Now back to the show. But for them, they kind of were feeling some frustrations with existing design tools. Like, traditional tools were really expensive. It reminds me of one tool that was very popular. I don't hear its name as much now, but definitely at that time when like I was first getting into tech, it was talk of the town, and you'd see YouTube tutorials all over the place for it. GIMP, which was like the free open source Photoshop tool kind of thing. But all these tools were just very inaccessible for a lot of people unless you were just balling with a lot of money.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where they start getting the idea of not GPU based or CPU based, but let's go browser based. And they start leveraging a lot of the learnings that they had with WebGL. For those that aren't even familiar with it, WebGL, it's a JavaScript API that lets browsers render interactive, like 2D and 3D graphics. I'm using the computer's GPU instead of the CPU, which kind of, we're talking about browser things, right? But unlike older web graphic methods like Canvas, for example, where it's used like the DOM and CSS transformations, WebGL allows like direct access to GPU acceleration, which means like complex visuals or complex items just in general can run much faster, but it gives you like a better experience overall. And I think this was like a big pivotal point, or pivotal tool rather, of them leveraging Figma to kind of be the browser-based tool that it is. And so just to clear that up for those that aren't familiar with WebGL just as a whole.
Yeah. And I think this is another thing kind of you're thinking too about speed here, like the ability to do this in the browser. I love that you mentioned that too, right? So when you think about the browser, you might know of JavaScript, right? You can use the scripting language to enable you to do things like click buttons or move menus. Like we're used to that being the language that we use to interact in the browser. When it comes time to doing things that you do in Figma or things that you would do in a design tool, we're talking filters, resizing. Like these things are very computationally complex. So WebGL gave us the ability to like do the painting and the paneling, but we also saw things like scripted in the beginning, which was kind of like C++ into something that you could use in the browser. And they were using this in like 2012 to 2015. It kind of gave you this file format that was usable. It worked. But eventually people probably know the thing that they moved on to, which was WebAssembly, which enabled us to do a lot of this complexity in the browser, compiles to something that is actually usable, runnable, and you can do all these complexities integrated into the browser now, which was, I think, another, again, just like lockstep. As the technology was changing, we got them having the ability to utilize it.
Yeah, and, it's funny because I was really thinking deep about this. I was like, why was this? Obviously, it's a great tool, don't get me wrong, but like, why was this such a big deal? Especially because the mindset had to be, it wasn't in terms of what we have accessible to us now, right? It's like, at that time, why was this such a big deal? Why was it so pivotal? And one thing that I started realizing was WebGL and all these items that they started leveraging, it gave them the ability and opened the door for certain things that just wasn't really around at the time, like smooth zooming or panning, and even real-time updates, I think, was a big thing for the multiplayer mode. I think that's like a very, very large facet of why this became accessible. But of course, WebAssembly plus WebGL and that combination, which what they later leveraged, the combo meant it can do even heavier CPU work. Like one example that I read online was shape Boolean operations in WebAssembly, then instantly renders the results in WebGL. Like those key performance tricks are next level, like batch rendering or delta rendering. Things like that, only re-rendering parts of the canvas that change instead of the entirety of the screen. That gives you a lot of things that you could start leveraging as far as speed goes, but also for a user, they don't want to see the screen update every single time. So just having those little dots one at a time, or having a box only re-render that box and not every other shape inside of there, because obviously Figma is like a combination of many shapes. That right there is the game changer.
And they have so many of these things that they just did and compounded over and over again. Like when you hear their journey of being like 3 years in stealth mode, you're like, what were you doing? But then realizing they're writing like custom text engines so that the pixel perfect control over all the text is being rendered inside of your design so that it looks identical in every single browser, every operating system. The exports that you're going to then deliver to a client, like in a PDF or something, they had to do that. They had to like actually figure all that stuff out in the browser and make it work without you ever thinking about it. And then we talked about their kind of killer feature, right? That the design going real-time multiplayer, and there were some algorithms that they're using, but they had to make a lot of these like decisions early on about, all right, the last person that makes the edit, are they the one? Is that the true design? If someone is still currently editing, is that the design? So they kind of got into a lot of these like multiplayer, like how do you handle conflict? How do you do all these transformations? And so that's like a piece, like, and they just kind of kept stacking each of these pieces over time. And they're on the forefront of kind of writing the Meteor C++ into Emscripten and then WebAssembly. They're incorporating WebGL. They're stacking this text engine. They're stacking the multiplayer. And it's just this history of building out this tool that at face value just works, and it works in the browser. It works everywhere. It kind of gets me excited.
So that's really all I got. But yeah, I will say I am very curious how this recording is going to come out, mainly because this is the only time we've ever recorded where I've heard you constantly go in and out, in and out, in and out.
In and out?
Constantly in and out and constantly robotic. So we'll stop here.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting pieces about all of this is the technology behind what's actually happening each step of the way in this journey. Because we go all the way back to the beginning, when Dylan and Evan first met at Brown, Evan was working on this fluid simulation demo in WebGL. And this becomes really key for how Figma is able to do what it does, and well. So when we look at a design in the browser and we kind of like zoom in, you can see like the tiles and the pixels, but how do you get that smooth? How do you do that as you're rendering larger and larger bits of information? How do you get users to be able to see all the things that you're creating? Well, they did this whole tile engine in WebGL, and Evan learned it way back when they had met. And this became kind of one of the key pieces that make editing possible in the browser to the same degree that we might have seen with the Adobe products or things that were the current vogue, where you're installing some sort of program onto your computer that then gets the benefits of utilizing the GPU for all this drawing, as opposed to being locked into the CPU. And up to this time in the browser, that just wasn't really heard of.
Yeah, and for those that may not necessarily be familiar, similar to me, I'll be honest, WebGL, it's a web graphics library. And so it's a JavaScript API that lets browsers render interactive like 2D and 3D graphics using the computer's GPU instead of the CPU. And unlike older web graphic methods like Canvas, for example, 2D context or DOM and CSS transformations, WebGL kind of allows direct access to the GPU acceleration, which at that time really wasn't common. It wasn't really leveraged or utilized much, but it also means complex visuals can run much faster. Like before WebGL, drawing in the browser, kind of like you said, meant CPU bound rendering, right? So it was just held up by whatever the CPU would allow it to do. And so because of WebGL, it gave Figma the ability to have thousands of shapes and layers and vector paths without lag, which is the big thing, which was like honestly the opening door for the multiplayer item that they ended up launching. But it also opened the door for things like smooth zooming and panning, or real-time updates for the multiplayer collaboration, which was a big deal.
Yeah, we also had some other pretty interesting things that are happening around this time too, right? If you're going to replicate a lot of what these desktop apps were doing, you have the rendering engine, right? You're using the GPU now, great. Now you got to code how all that works, right? And so you are in the browser, so you're thinking JavaScript, right? And yeah, it's great for if you're handling the menus and buttons and things like that. But once you start getting into these deep things like filters and resizing and all this stuff that has to happen super fast, you're talking to start looking at languages like C++ and things along those lines that give you that control. And so back in 2012, 2015 era, when they're still in stealth mode, mind you, like this is why I think it's not wild that they didn't ship for 3 years, because building those types of things are pretty complex. You're basically taking ideas from the video game industry, from a handful of companies that have built this stuff on desktop apps, and now trying to redo it all in the browser. So you're compiling C++ stuff into Scriptin so that it can actually have a format that can run in the browser. And they're able to kind of hobble along on this and make it work, get all these complex things able to run in the browser. But we see kind of in the 2017-ish era later on that they get WebAssembly, right? And so WebAssembly is that idea now that we can have this kind of very logic heavy complex code that's broken down into something that can fully run in the browser. And that kind of lays the framework for them to build a lot more of these meaty things into what we want to experience as a design tool in the browser.
I think that's good.
Cool. I think that I like the other thing too about the text, but we don't have to worry about that.
About the text?
I'll say it real quick. And one of the other things too that I think we just don't realize how many things they had to actually tackle, right? The web browsers handling text. They built their own text engine. You think about all the text that you're seeing in your designs, the browser's got to know how to render that. Not only does the browser need to know how to render it, it has to look good in the browser, the operating systems, the exports, the PDFs that you're skipping out. All these things are what they built so that you could have that experience. And then even down the line, when we get to that key feature, the multiplayer, that's a lot of algorithms and patterns that I don't know we really saw yet fully in the browser outside of maybe games. And they're figuring out how to do this so that when you're designing with someone, what's the last render? What's the last paint? What's the thing that you actually see? How do you handle all those conflicts? How do you do all this at scale? So it just seems like edge case after edge case for me. And I think we'd be remiss to not talk about one of what is just a phenomenal technical achievement on top of a business achievement. And I don't know how many other teams could have pulled it off at that time.
Oh yeah, like there were definitely some key performance tricks, right? And when you think of like trying to start a business, this is a mountain of mountains to try and climb in the early stages. Because you're right, they did do things with rendering. They did things like batch rendering. So instead of like redrawing each shape individually, they grouped several operations together before sending them to the GPU. That way, you're getting the batch at one time, it's going through really well. Or the biggest thing that I ended up having to do a ton of research on, delta rendering. So it's like you're only re-rendering parts of the canvas that change instead of the entirety of the screen, which was pretty common back then, right? And so it's like if you're drawing, say for example, a stroke, and it's only affected this small part, why would you change the entirety of the canvas itself? And maybe you have a box that's representing maybe a nav bar at the top. Obviously, the rest of the page doesn't need to be re-rendered with the creation of this box and the movement of this box. So these different techniques, they really were, above par for a lot of competition out there. And I think this right there alone showcases like it wasn't just the technology that came out, but it was the leveraging of said technology and even learning of new techniques to kind of create one of the world's most popular tools at that point. But they started also leveraging some of the tooling that they were able to build. But one thing really happens in a moment where they weren't sure if this was going to really thrive or not. And this one event really, really fully kind of proved the theory. And it showed that there was a 6-lane superhighway kind of wide length of market opportunity that's now cleared. And that was in May of 2013, Adobe Fireworks was discontinued.
Yeah.
Dylan saw the rising importance of design software and accelerated, and it became easier to build great design, but also it showed this will be a critical differentiator from anything else out there.
I remember so many of my friends like losing it. I remember talking about this so much. We had these other tools that were kind of coming around, but you had people that had their whole lives invested in this design tool. And I remember so vividly people just like panicking about what was next. And so they latched on to other things that were available at that moment. But I still have a soft spot for it in my heart because I don't feel like anything's ever kind of got me back to it until we had the later versions of Figma. And so it was interesting for them to, at that moment, realize that there's a gap in the market. There are these other tools, but they all have their shortcomings. You're swapping sketch files back and forth, final 2000, final update 1, and you're setting that back and forth. There's this greater vision of what design could look like, and finally you have a platform that can make it real when we go back to kind of what they were doing in the browser to make that happen. And so I think it's worthwhile to kind of talk a little bit about what they built, how they built it. And the other thing too is that's wild is they took 3 years stealth mode. No one knows that they're building this. This is unheard of in modern startups to really take that amount of time for a tool, not getting it in front of users. There'll be a whole lot of conflict that comes about that we'll talk about. But in this build time, like what are they doing? What are the tools that they use? What are the technologies that rose? I think it'd be cool to kind of take a little deep dive into that.
We are. And I'll tell you this, that one interesting thing I discovered happened because it was almost not even called Figma, the tool that they built. Funny enough, they ended up naming the company Figma. And this is also a good reason why you should always surround yourself with really smart people. Dylan was really pushing at that time and considering to name the tool Summit to differentiate it from the parent company of Figma. So that way there would be a holding company or that would own the tool Summit, and it would be Figma. And they had just hired their first marketer at Figma, and her name was Claire Butler. She immediately recognized this is a mistake. Do not name this thing Summit. And she argued passionately, like, look, Summit, it's very generic. It's used in a lot of places. It is not memorable in any way, shape, or form. And especially if you're going into the market with a new tool, memorability, like being recognizable, is probably one of the biggest factors that you need. But the other thing that you need to consider here is, how are you going to differentiate yourself from everybody else in terms of them calling their thing a summit, right? You have events that are summits, you have actual mountains. It's just too common. And on top of that, think of your target market. These are people that are very creative and interesting and different, and they want to have an identity to the things that they're attached with. That was the argument. We need a single powerful identity, was the exact quote that Dylan said that she had. And Figma was inspired by a figment of imagination, and it captured our mission, bridging imagination with reality. The name had to stay. I like that.
That's fire.
Yeah. So this will now lead us into Act 2, building and struggling with perseverance. If you liked any of this so far, I'm telling you right now, everything that we're presenting to you is weeks and weeks of research. I'm not saying that you should feel bad that we did the research. I'm saying you should enjoy it. But if you do enjoy it, don't hesitate to drop a like on the podcast, wherever it is that you're listening to it. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, drop that like. If you haven't given a follow, please do so. It helps us out a lot and boost the show in all the ways that it can. Or just drop a comment. If you've listened to this comment so far, drop a comment that says, I use Figma, just to let us know that you're here so far. That's all it takes. So, struggle and perseverance, Act 2. It took them 3 years, from 2012, the inception of building, 2013, really getting the gas under them after Adobe Fireworks, discontinuation, to now getting to 2015. They are ready to launch their product to the masses. And they've been promoting it. They've been talking about it. They've been telling folks. They go to the meetups, say, you won't believe what I'm making. But the one core feature that has everyone buzzing, and it's a big one because no one had really done it prior to this, a real-time multi-designer collaboration aspect where you can go and collaborate on designs in real time with other people on your team or other designers. It was completely incomplete.
Yeah. To the point where the team's revolting internally. Their advisors are not recommending that they invest in the next round. They're running out of capital. They both had accepted the Thiel Fellowship, right? So they had like 3.8 million to play with over those couple of years, but that's coming dry. And they've been promising this tool internally to the team, delay. They've been now more public, delay. No one expects them to actually ship at this point. And it's kind of a really low point for the team. They're internally revolting. There's mini mutinies that are happening. Dylan's having to go through a whole change in their leadership style to quell the rebellion. But they are still quietly working on some things that no one's really pushed forward in the browser to this point.
Well, it's funny. It's a culmination of so many things. Number one, early management struggles, and he finally realizes for all the things that he's great at, he's absolutely horrible at micromanaging and being a direct manager. He struggles greatly with laying out tasks and micromanaging, but also at hiring the wrong people. He would sometimes feel bad about hurting someone's feelings. And so that could be a reason to put an interview on somebody's side, right? And hire them just because he's like, they're a great person. Why should we not? Even though they didn't have the skill for the role, or they had the skill for the role and they were just the wrong person for the company, but he had no idea how to hire properly. He didn't have an idea how to give feedback back in a proper way, to where internal employees were really miserable under his leadership style, and he recognized it, and he kept trying to pivot. He didn't want it. He didn't want to be bad at this. He really put an ample effort. From everything that I could find online, it seemed as if he really put in some effort, and people recognized that, but they still were like, effort is great, but if you're trying to make a pie and it's still coming out as soup, we can't just drink the soup saying, hey, it's a pie, right? Like, something's not adding up here. And he finally says, you know what? I'm making an executive decision. I didn't start a company to not be able to do an executive decision. I'm doing one. And we are going to hire a professional manager. And this will free me to focus on strategic vision and guiding our company technically and daily operations the way it needs to be done. Yeah. And the professional manager can really focus on the people and make sure that we're doing this right. This was a big game changer. And what's interesting to me, at least, is it highlights the importance of, honestly, founders recognizing their own limitations early on. Like, he could have just been stubborn, but like, no, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure this out. He might have lost everybody. He might have lost all the good ones and the bad ones. But to be completely honest with you, it's proof that founders don't always do everything right. And you don't have to necessarily be perfect at everything. If you recognize what's going wrong, that's a perfect situation for you to be like, you know what? This is incorrect. I need to pivot on this and go there. And he did. And this was actually a big reason for them doing really, really well. Claire, the first marketer, she described a very critical decision that they had. We faced two paths in regards to this feature still being undone: delays for perfection or launch immediately. But do we choose urgency and momentum that we have right now and decide to launch without the multi-designer feature and start embracing iterative improvement? And it was a collective, we launch.
Yep.
And they did. And they launched it.
2015, early preview. Folks are seeing it for the first time. They're starting to see some of the features that are coming out. Kind of starts to become a passionate group of users quite quickly. Yeah. And I think the other last piece before we move on to like the next phase here is that journey, like that growth, set them up for the generational run that they had. Like that proving ground, that Dylan had to go through. He had some phenomenal people in his corner, right? At this point, one of their mentors, John Lilly, former CEO of Mozilla, was in the corner pushing him for that managerial intervention, whatever you want to call it. So they had some phenomenal people that wanted to push them, and he had those lessons to learn. And one of my favorite things in future interviews that you listen to Dylan, he's like, yeah, we'll take months to find the right person. He like ingrained each of those lessons deeply into him, and that helped him kind of turn this into one of the best businesses that we've seen in a while. And so I think it's important for folks that are listening to understand, like, hey, you go through these lessons, but if you can learn the lessons and incorporate it into your practice and actually incorporate it into your practice, so many wonderful things can come of it. So they launch. People are seeing it for the first time. They're interacting with it. After 3 years.
Yeah. Early feedback was deeply skeptical.
Yep.
With many designers even questioning if Figma is going to last a year. And I saw an interview, it was kind of old, of Dylan and his reaction to some of the early posts that he saw online. And he said one comment struck him to the core to where he shut down his computer. And that was, if this is the future of design, I'm quitting.
Yeah.
I know that had to hit hard, because there are times where even we'll get comments on our stuff to where it's like critical, and I'm like, damn. Now imagine you spent 3 years making something that you just think people are going to love. I know that hurt. And
sure.
Dylan calmly responded, recognizing that innovation, it will always face some kind of resistance early on. But he realized one thing: we need to truly prove the value, not just because we believe it, but it has to be through user experiences rather than us debating our position. So if it's not inherently clear right away what we're doing, we need to fix this. We need to put something more forward. We need to really go through things. But what we really need to do is get the one thing that we know will win the hearts of people. And that's our multi-designer collaboration tool that we don't have right now.
Yeah. And so they had the initial pushback. Like, does real-time collaboration have a place in the design process? But there was a small group that latched onto it, right? That saw that value of what real-time collaboration could grow into, that gave hopefully the team some sort of validation that they might be on the right path, even though the initial reaction was quite harsh. And it kind of happened at the right time too, because they're out of money, but they did get this workable prototype going. And then they bring in the big boys. Greylock comes in, Index, a couple others, 13 million in December of 2015. Now they got the cash. They've launched. They got a passionate group of designers. They have this new concept of multiplayer design. They're ready.
Yep. And what's interesting here is, so this brings us into Act 3, unlocking multiplayer. So the tool which they introduced, as Leon already said, is multiplayer collaboration. And the launch of multiplayer revealed so much potential in Figma, and it was easy to recognize. Users hosted design parties where people would see it like as a playful challenge, right? And that really got people on board. So it wasn't just now like a little design tool that people could potentially use in their browser, but it was more so becoming bigger than that. And the growth was happening at a tremendous rate. And of course, 2025, in the age of social media, like, prime example, OpenAI, when they made those Gilby anime photos, social media went wild. Well, guess what? Social media was nothing in comparison to where it is today, right? 2015, 2014, 2016, around that time, nothing was lit on fire the way it is now, right? And so with them actually going out of their way to host design parties, this got the people talking about it in a way that was way broader than ever before. And so it became like real-time collaboration that people could like do things on. And Dylan said in an interview that I saw that he said these events turned people that were skeptics and really almost like a complete opposite stance into overnight advocates. It vividly proved our value, whether they could hear talking points or not. There was no debate that needed to be had. They became believers and advocates of our platform's unique strengths. This right here was what they were looking for the whole time. And it came through an iterative improvement instead of out the gate beginning.
And now they kind of have the engine, right? That passionate, like, fire user base. They're getting the traction on social, and it's a tool that people are deeply integrating into like their day-to-day workflow. Like, that's what you dream of, like a product that people love and they have to use it every single day to get their job done. And Dylan's going on to talk a lot about that in future interviews, about like that's where their growth came from. It's just a tool that people love and they have to use it every day. And then that word of mouth spread and they keep pushing from that point forward.
And what's funny is at this stage, this is when some very big things happen. And it's one thing to get validation from users, right? Always great. It's another thing when you get validation from users that are willing to pay.
Yeah.
That right there is incredible. But it's another thing when you get validation from companies with very big checkbooks. And this starts happening. They get validation from companies like Notion, Uber that bring them on, and they say they got to have this tool. They haven't seen anything like this. This is the game changer that they're looking for their designers. They have to have it. And this becomes not only early adopters, it amplifies the absolute heck out of Figma's credibility within the marketplace. Yep. This didn't only validate, it stamped them with approval that these companies are not just supporting or believing in it, they're paying for the privilege to do so. And that is when you know you've got something really big. And Claire highlighted the significance. Winning the Skeptics at influential companies marked a major turning point. It marked a major turning point for us. Their internal advocacy was powerful. It was significantly boosting adoption, and it validated our vision. This is what we needed.
And then they go on the tear, right? 25 million Series B, 40 million Series C. We're only in 2019 at this point. They got the cash. They got some of the best engineering talent in the world right now. And they got a tool that's being implemented at all these major corporations. Yeah.
And you know when they're going for that Series B and they're asking for money, the first thing out of their mouth is Uber's using this.
Yep.
Notion is using this. You already know if investors were not in the know of that, that silenced any chatter in the room to make sure people were paying attention. And stuff like this is what makes those fundraising rounds significantly easier for people to walk through. And a prime example of that, not to make a tangent, but just to show what is something that's very recent right now that people couldn't understand how they're raising funds at the level that they are. Cursor.
Yeah.
We may have to do an episode on Cursor.
That'd be fun.
But this leads me into Act 4, scale and impact.
Yeah.
We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but from the fundraising and everything else. But one thing in particular, Dylan's unconventional decisions required engineers to directly handle user support queries. One user in Japan found a bug in Figma's Japanese version, and he basically, reported it. It was like the middle of the night, reported it, and he was like, no one's going to see this thing, And within 2 weeks, the bug was gone. And he said, they actually listened. Who does that?
And
this is how. Go ahead.
And this is in the age of Adobe, where the big people in town, we make changes when we want to make changes. The product has been the same for the past 10 years, but the cost is going up double, triple. And so to have that kind of rapid iteration, game changer.
And the best part about it too is because it was browser based. It was like updates were so easy to push out because it's all within the browser.
Yep.
And so you don't have to have them downloaded and this and that. It's like browser based. Just send the update when you want to. And this right here is where that scale and impact really made a difference. Claire describes this strategic value. Though seemingly inefficient, this practice fostered deep empathy and trust, allowing us unparalleled insight into user needs and pain points. We learned so much.
Yeah. This is that moving away from a desktop application to the web platform. I don't think people realize how that's changed for a lot of businesses, the ability to iterate quickly and not have to wait. Right. Even things like even on mobile, still getting things updated, pushed through to the app store is still a lag. But the web is now that free platform. It's open. These updates are happening quickly. And also the technologies at this point have improved to where they can start to do really serious optimizations, right? Things that a couple year or two weren't able to be done. We're fully in WebAssembly territory now. We're fully into this place where the browsers can hang now with desktop applications. No.
Yeah. And to be honest, this was almost the start of a new shift because you've seen tools like Google Docs and Google Suite tools or Microsoft Word now is like almost completely browser based at this point. This really fueled a lot of that surge.
Yep.
But there was one big issue with this scale and impact, and that was fundraising. Initially, fundraising rounds, it's a walk in the park. Investors are excited. They see the design parties. They see the adoption. Everything is going great. And so, like any investor that puts in a lot of money into a company, they ask the question, when are we monetizing? And Dylan's like, yeah, that little thing of monetizing a product. Yeah, we're not doing that right now. We're going to keep it free. And as any reasonable investor that you tell that to, they said, what? Huh? What you mean free? We got the whole world talking about this. It's in multiple languages. What are you talking about free? And Dylan said, this is going to stay free. Hey, by the way, we need to raise more money. And so you will be diluted. Dylan, at this stage, is facing a ridiculous number of rejections because now investors are very worried because they're saying, hey, in the beginning, you were trying to gain market share. It totally makes sense. You've got it. We need to monetize this in order to turn this into a business. And Dylan said, no, you don't see what I see. We have to keep this free for now. We have to always have a free option no matter what. There has to be something for the community. We have to have this to be free, but we need money right now. This is right around late 2020. He's facing a lot of rejection. And then one thing happens that quells or really stops all the objections. Little thing, you might have missed it. Missed it,
yeah. Some people blinked through it.
The pandemic, which is act number 5. How the pandemic changed everything for Figma.
So we're world shutting down. We're going fully remote. And you mean to tell me that there's this browser-based tool with real-time collaboration? Perfect stuff.
Apparently people liked it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, there were quite a few tools that became household names because of that pandemic.
Yeah.
Zoom, a common one. You know what's a funny thing? We did a meetup prior to the pandemic where we had a speaker in Brazil. And at this time I lived in Memphis, Tennessee. And we had the jankiest setup in the world to where I called him on, mind you, it was a very terrible laptop. It was a $250 Samsung laptop. But I called him from it. But the laptop had no webcam or mic installed on it. Yeah. And so he's giving a talk to a room. And I have to then call him on my phone in order to field questions to him that he can respond with. And but you know what? It was phenomenal for Memphis because we never had value like that speak to us, right? But at that time, there was no household name of Zoom and Google Meet and all these things. Pandemic made this to where everybody knew what they were.
Yeah.
And the pandemic also made it to where everyone knew what Figma was. And anyone who had anything to do with tech was now getting comfortable with it. And one prime example of that is at this stage of my career, I was using Adobe XD for wireframing and things like that. I'd never even heard of Figma at that point. I was just used to Adobe products for everything. And the pandemic introduced me to Figma to where I was using it nonstop.
And they even seized the moment too, right? They're like, all right, everyone's going remote. They have the ability to render things in the browser like anybody else. So they released, and keeping with the Fig puns, FigJam, right? Mm-hmm. They released out FigJam, which is kind of the wireframing whiteboarding tool that anyone can use. And you have a litany of designers that are already deeply invested in Figma at this point. They're now going fully remote. And team needs other tools. And so they're really responsive to that moment in time of being like, all right, what if folks need, how can we increase our surface area, maybe even outside the scope of designers? And so that FigJam is one of the things I remember people seeing kind of pretty broadly as we went into the pandemic.
Yeah. And what's interesting about FigJam is, and I know a lot of people use it for this, we used it for it, was people felt like outside of just the design thing alone, we're missing collaboration in other areas. This kind of created that moment to where if you weren't a designer, it got you in the ecosystem no matter what, number one. But number two, you were having people use it for everything. I remember even doing like anonymous feedback retros with FigJam. I remember using it as a tool where everybody is on Zoom kind of ideating together to then present to the designers to create user flow stories. Like there's so much that could be used that would just support it at that point. And I felt like this was like a phenomenal win on their side for sure. But they definitely took charge of the moment. It's like the funny thing for them is they didn't just take charge of one moment, they took charge of two. If you really think about it. Pandemic and Adobe Fireworks. Discontinuation. That was the one big takeaway I took from all this. They found each moment in order to capitalize accurately.
And I think that even leads us to the rumblings of their acquisition, right? Their peak pandemic. Real-time online collaboration will not ever probably be as in demand as we were peak pandemic. And so explosive growth, people wanting access to Figma's now, you can't call it install base, but their user base, right? It's now cemented as the design tool. It's cemented as now one of the leading collaboration tools. Most businesses are utilizing it in some way, shape, or form, where they know if their design team is using it or not. Adobe's probably starting to get a little scared there, right? They're seeing their holy grail could slip away there.
I mean, I know I wasn't the only one to go from Adobe XD to Figma, and Adobe now says we tried to pretend like they didn't exist. We tried to ignore them, but everybody knows at this point it's a facade.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that they are taking our lunch.
Yeah.
And what do you do when someone takes your lunch? You either go out to lunch with them and share lunch together, or you buy them. And that's what they do. And they throw out a number that I don't care who you are, you're going to have some interest in that conversation. And they threw out the number 20 billion. That's what a B, in case you didn't hear the $20 billion from two friends at a university making something, to hiring their first marketer, to hiring their first professional manager, to hiring all this, releasing a product that was not perfect, iterating. They end up building this to where Adobe offered them $20 billion. And if you were an investor that stuck around through all that free phase, you had to be like, this is paying off. Finally.
I knew I was right.
And then it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Regulators all over, and to be honest, rightfully so, said, if this acquisition goes through, there will be no way any other design software could ever have market share.
Yeah.
It's unreasonable. It would be market dominance. It would be monopoly like no other. There's no way this will ever occur. And it was shot down because of that.
After about a year, too. That was a year-long process to go through kind of like EU, UK regulatory stuff. And so you're talking about a year of employees, a year of investors salivating at a $20 billion number. And then after a year, it disappears.
But Figma, like the baddie that they are, they made sure they didn't walk away empty-handed.
Yep.
They got $1 billion as a breakup fee.
Mm-hmm.
They knew, to a certain degree, this is a very tall order.
Yeah.
But Adobe's like, no, we're going to make this happen. Like, it's going to happen. And they're like, are you sure? Well, if you're that sure, we're going to have this clause in there for a termination. And it's whether you terminate it or the government does. And they put that clause for 5% of the buying price, or $1 billion. And they were able to get that.
Amazing.
And they then say, well, now that we're not being acquired, it's time for our favorite 3-letter word, IPO.
Yeah. And I think the other kind of interesting thing they did as they kind of ramped up for the IPO is they brought in that secondary offer, right? So about 5 to 6 months after the Adobe offer doesn't work out, 12.5 billion in a secondary, so folks can take some stuff off the table. It loosens the pressure to IPO, so they can keep innovating, they can keep doing wild stuff. Figma slides, we'll let that slide for a second, and then get to the IPO that we've all heard of recently, right? So you've been through this, right? Especially the early folks, through all the problems in stealth, through all the stumbling blocks, through the regulatory issues. You've been knocked down a little bit. So to bring in that secondary, phenomenal, gives them some breathing room and gets us to the IPO.
Yep. And it's interesting. Dylan, in one of the last interviews that I was able to read up and see, Dylan kind of mentioned that the pandemic had underscored our ability to show the importance of readiness to seize opportunities, even during unforeseen market shifts, which they did twice, right? We kind of mentioned that. And it kind of paved the way. Imagine a year long that you spend trying to sell your company. After a couple months, you got to believe that's going to happen. Like maybe a couple weeks, you're like, this can go down, but that far into it, you got to believe to a certain degree, like, this is going to go down, like surely a year, and it doesn't. And so you shift and you pivot. And so he said, you have to remain courageous and embrace empathy and deeply engage your communities. Placing people at the heart of technology paves the way for a brighter, inclusive future. And I think he's right. I think that's the reason why they're still the go-to tool for a lot of things. And I'm sure somebody listening to this is like, no, I use Adobe for everything. And I totally get it. But it's hard to discredit where you can go with something. And just because it isn't your favorite tool doesn't mean it isn't someone's favorite tool, right? And the market valuations kind of show this is definitely a ton of people's favorite tool. And based on that, we're happy the meme generator didn't take off. It's been real. It's been fun. And we will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace.